Hey everyone, Brian from All Day Ruckoff here, and today we're doing an AAR on the GORUCK Constellation 6 event. I'm going to be going over the Constellation 6 event that I recently ran through in March of 2019. It was actually the first Constellation event of the year, which was pretty exciting, and it was in Seattle, Washington. For those who don't know, Constellation is an urban survival event put on by GORUCK. So the whole point of it is to learn how to survive in an urban situation if there's a natural disaster or if the government fails, that kind of a thing. One thing to note about Constellation events, they change every year. I did Constellation back in 2017, 2018, I did it again this year, 2019, and then there's huge changes scheduled for 2020. GORUCK asked me not to post about it yet, but don't worry, as soon as I get the okay, it's going to be up on the All Day Ruckoff website. I mentioned that because this AAR, the stuff I'm going through, might not be applicable for 2020, but it happened in 2019. So it's kind of fun to get this all recorded so that you can go back and remember what the event was like back then. Constellation 6, that 6 designates 6 hours. The event runs roughly 6 hours from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So it's through the day, kind of like a GORUCK Light. The packing list for Constellation 6 is a lot different than your standard GORUCK event. You don't bring any weight, first off, so it's a non-weighted event. Your gear list includes duct tape, zip ties, a 2-liter bottle. I got a whole packing list for it, and I've got a video of me shoving all that stuff into a pack for that event. So if you're curious about the gear, you can check that out, but it's definitely not your typical GORUCK event. So if you're signed up for one, make sure you pack everything you need, check the list, and don't show up thinking it's going to be like a light. Leading up to the event, Constellation 6 was, like I said, it started at 9 a.m. It was in Bellevue, Washington, so just a little bit east of Seattle. And a 9 a.m. start time for me can be a little rough because I really enjoy that coffee in the morning, so I brought coffee. Constellation notoriously is a learning event with some rucking and skills, so it's not a cadre beatdown. You can bring coffee, you can bring snacks, you can bring food. Highly recommended by me that you do that so that you don't get hungry during it. Got to the event on time, which is always a plus. Some people did stroll in late. There was no extra PT for them. Don't stress too much about it. Obviously, you don't want to be late, but this is not like a GORUCK Light or a GORUCK Tough where you're going to get smoked for being late. Most likely, depending on the cadre. I've got my trusty Field Notes notebook right here that I brought to the event. One of the things about GORUCK Constellation, I recommend you bring a notebook, bring a pen, because they're going to talk about a lot of different skills, and it's going to be just a fire hose of information, so you want to get down as much as you can. Constellation 6 events are team events, kind of like Scavengers, a team event. When you show up, you might have a team before you get there. You might show up without a team and link up with some people there. That's what I did. I didn't have a team going into this. Came, found people who didn't have a team as well, ended up doing the event with them, had a ton of fun. But the point is, if you're showing up with a friend and you want to do the event with them, make sure you're on the same team as them. Otherwise, you're not going to see them often. And the inverse of that is if you show up with someone you don't like, then try and get on a different team and you'll never see them during the event. The way the event's structured, you've got a 4 to 6 person team, and throughout all the missions, every time you go out in the city, you'll be with that 4 to 6 person team. The only time the entire class is together is when you're back at the starting location, learning skill sets from the GORUCK cadre. Getting into what we did at the event, I've got my Field Notes notebook here, which has notes on Constellation 6 and the Constellation 12. I recommend you bring a notebook, you bring a pen. It doesn't have to be Field Notes. I like Field Notes because they're made in the USA by a pretty cool company, but you can just bring a piece of scratch paper and a pen that you found on the side of the road. Doesn't matter. Just bring something to write with so that you can remember the fire hose of information that will come your way. What I've got in my notes, we started out talking about clothing, talking about gear. I'm not going to go into huge depth on the topics because you can do a Constellation event and get that information. But we started out there, basically clothing that you can wear, gear that you can have on you that will make a disaster situation not as bad. The next thing we talked about was movements, how to navigate a map, how to move from point to point, how to tell if you're being followed, how to avoid that, and how to make it so that people can't really track you. Every Constellation event I've done has had an awesome map. This is the map that we got for Constellation 6. Everyone who showed up got one to take home. We've got 4 points on this, A, B, C, and D. And these points were all around the start point. We were able to choose the points. The category had a couple in mind, and these are the ones we decided on. It ended up being a pretty significant distance between them, which was something I don't think we really anticipated. And I'll get into that a little bit. The first movement we did was to practice movement in an urban environment. The goal was to hit every single point in the most ridiculous way possible, pretty much. So that would be go down to D, then hit B, then either A or C, and then get the other one. Basically, if someone's tracking you, go the direction that makes the least sense. So if you're going down to D, why would you ever cut across to B if you have to hit all these points? You would, try and box this out, as opposed to doing this horrible thing where you end up going pretty much twice the distance. So we were given roughly an hour and a half to do this, which is a good chunk of time out of a 6-hour class. And so it looks like they're close on the map, but trust me, they're not. We ended up hitting D, then we went up to B, and when we got there, we were told to come back because that in itself was roughly 3 miles, and that was getting pretty close to that hour and a half. If you're doing a Constellation 6 event and you get to choose the points, maybe don't choose points that are too far away from the start, but again, make them far enough away that you actually do have to trek out there. When we got back, we talked more about maps, navigation, tracking people, route selection, hiding, scavenging, water purification, fire, food, and then creating a gas mask. And so it was a lot of information. We were there, it was over an hour easily, maybe even 2 hours worth of content that was just fire hose at us. So it was nice to write it down. And a lot of the tips were interesting because it was things that once you were told them, it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of common sense, but it wasn't something that you would have thought of on the fly. And it was a ton of fun to make another gas mask. Always a good time. After we went through all that learning, we got to practice the hiding and the hunting. So we had enough time for 3 of the teams, there are 4 teams total, 3 of the teams to go out and hide, and 1 of the teams to go and hunt them. So we used the skills that we learned on how to make a hide site, on how to choose a hide site, and when we got there, we ended up working on our steel can that we ended up turning into a stove. This entire time we've been in contact with GORUCK through text messages, so we got the call to go back to the start point, headed back there. That's where we practiced escaping restraints, the duct tape, the zip ties, all that fun stuff, and we led into the culminating exercise. So that culminating exercise, a lot of fun. Don't want to spoil the surprise if you're signed up for it, but you do get to use pretty much everything you made up to this point. That would be the gas mask, that would be the stove, and it was a good time. Pro tip on the stove, make sure the thing you bring is not made of cardboard. Every single Constellation I've been to, someone has brought a cardboard coffee tin, and this is what happens when you bring it. As you can see, starting the fire in it, the side is catching on fire, the side is burning, the entire thing is burning. It's not ideal for cooking something when your entire cooking apparatus is on fire. After the culminating exercise, we got patched, and then it was off to get some food before Constellation 12 started. Looking back at the event, I had a lot of fun. It's a 6-hour event, and it's a low-stress event. This isn't a cadre yelling at you. This isn't a ton of PT. There's actually no PT. So you don't have to worry too much when you show up. There are some struggles with trying to teach all this information in 6 hours, and that definitely shows a little bit. And so it'll be interesting to see how all this changes for 2020. Things I would have done differently at this event, I would have brought more coffee. That's about it. I only brought 1 coffee mug worth of coffee, and I didn't drink enough that morning, so I would have brought more. But besides that, I brought all the required gear, I brought some food, and it was perfect. Anything I wish there was different about the event? The tough part about Constellation is that all the teams go out to different points and they all come back, which means teams are coming back at different times. At first, that's totally fine because you have extra time to work on your gas mask, to work on your stove. But once you've finished those, then you're just kind of hanging out with other GRT talking at the start point. One thing I wish that GORUCK did, I put this on the end of the event survey, and it sounds like they might be bringing this in for 2020. We'll see. I would love if they had brought lock picks and locks, stuff like that, that you can work on some skills while you're waiting for the other teams to show up. Little things like that that you can have fun with, and you don't just end up sitting around and talking with each other. Another thing that I might have done differently, since we were allowed to choose the starting locations, going back in time, I might have brought them in closer so that we were actually able to hit all 4 at the beginning. Obviously, it's nice to have them far apart, but if you're only given 6 hours for an event, how much of that time do you want to spend out there rucking between the points? I would have rather spent less time doing that and had more time in the team hunting scenario of it. Based on the amount of time we had enough time for one team to hunt the other 3. It would have been nice if we could have switched it up while we were out there. But again, I mean, there's 6 hours to go through all that information. It's not enough time. It's a tough one. Was it worth doing? I enjoyed it. I enjoy hanging out with people in the community. I really do. And so spending 6 hours was a lot of fun. I mean, it wasn't a huge workout. We only went 5.5 miles. It's not like I was sweating during any of this, but I had a great time hanging out with everyone there. I mean, it's great seeing the cadre when they come to town. And the weather was great. It was a really enjoyable day. So if you're going into a Constellation 6 and you think that you're going to learn how to survive an earthquake, you're going to get all the skills you need to survive a terrorist attack. I mean, there's just not enough time in 6 hours to learn all that. So just level setting there. Don't think that you're going to go away from this being the ultimate terrorism survivor pro, if there even is such a thing. But you'll get a well-rounded basic understanding of the information that you need to survive something like that. And you'll have the tools needed to kind of research additional techniques, tactics, that kind of stuff. And just you'll have more information to think about if something happens. Do I think it's worth doing? I had a lot of fun. I would do it again. I know there are some people out there who wouldn't do another one, and there are who would. And that's the exact same with GORUCK events, the light events, the tough events, the heavies. Some people do one and then they're done. Some people do more. I would do another Constellation 6 event, but I know there's people who wouldn't. So just throwing that out there. Final thoughts on the event. I love the Constellation series. I have a lot of fun learning all these skills, just hanging out with the community. And if there's one thing that I think is important to know going into this, which I probably should not have saved to the end, it's that if you go to one of these events, you have to be able to get into this kind of role play mode where we're in a natural disaster, we're in a terrorist attack, something bad has happened, and we have to react to it. And so if you're not able to pretend, kind of flip your brain around and pretend to be in this kind of a situation, you might struggle at GORUCK Constellation. And that doesn't mean physically struggle, but just struggle to enjoy it. Because to really get the most out of this, you have to be moving from point to point, thinking that there are other teams out there hunting you, and if they catch you, they're going to rob you and possibly get rid of you. So getting into that mindset can be tough. And if that's something you really, really struggle with, then you might want to reevaluate doing this event. I hope you enjoyed this AAR. Again, I enjoyed the Constellation event. If you have any questions about GORUCK Constellation 6, leave a comment. I can definitely answer it based on my experience at this March 2nd, 2019 event in Bellevue. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Would truly appreciate that. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please consider subscribing. A lot more GORUCK content in the channel, a lot more on the way, and definitely some fun stuff to come. Thank you so much for all of the support, and don't forget, attitude is everything. Keep yours positive, and drink hard, ruck harder.